Congressman Ron Paul from Texas, presidential candidate for the GOP nomination, joins us once again on Radio Free America. Congressman, good to have you back.
Thank you. Good to be with you.
What is this Snoop Dogg, Barry Manilow thing with you? I mean, you've got endorsements from the most eclectic group of Americans known to mankind. What is this all about?
Well, I keep telling people that freedom is popular and it brings people together. So I would expect anybody who defends liberty in a consistent manner, they're going to bring a lot of diversity together, and it invites tolerance. So that's what the real message of liberty is all about.
It's interesting. Those of us who love economics, especially in your case, Austrian economics, but going all the way back to Henry Hazlitt's classic Economics in One Lesson, anybody who's read that got a little taste of Austrian economics, as I'm sure you have. Those people like you who love that have to look at this, though. And when you get Barry Manilow or a Snoop Dogg or people whose interests, or Jesse Ventura, whose interests are foreign policy, or ending the war on drugs, which is failing, or returning marriage to the states and not having a federal policy. You know what strikes me is that to those people, economics might be taking a back seat.
Well, for some people, I think that is true. But if you took a statistical analysis of it, when you go campaigning, people are still pretty worried about the economy. Young people are interested in the subjects you just talked about, but they're also concerned, about the kind of debt we have and how war contributes to that debt. So I think generally it comes together, and I talk a whole lot about that you can't be worried about economics but not foreign policy. They're all mixed up, and individual liberty is part of it. So you have to have a basic understanding of what personal liberty is, and I think you can solve most of our problems, or at least solve them a lot better than what the government does for us.
Indeed, the whole ugly specter of tax withholding came about in World War II.
Right, and some people claim that Milton Friedman had something to do with that, and I had one proposal where I'd eliminate withholding tax, and there would be a revolt rather quickly if we had to write a check every month for what we spend.
And yet, you look at people like a Snoop Dogg, and I don't want to make too much of this, but you look at people like that, and in the past, they've been in favor of the welfare state. They weren't out there for cutting programs, and you're going to cut $1 trillion. Off goes. You got a great commercial out there running about the Department of Commerce, Energy, HUD. All of these departments are going to go. Maybe you're right. Maybe it is bringing people together.
Well, I think one reason why everybody's concerned is even those who have been on the receiving end, and about half the people receiving, the other half have to pay the bills. I think everybody's concerned, maybe not for the same reason, but if the people on the receiving end realize that the Treasury is bare, it doesn't take too much of intelligence to figure out that you can't maintain a deficit of over $1 trillion every year. That has to come to an end, and that's why they're looking at least at my proposal. And my suggestion is try not to punish the most innocent people first and try to work our way out. And that's why I emphasize overseas spending and the war, some of these departments that we don't need. And I think people feel less threatened than me saying, well, we got to balance the budget, so we have to throw everybody off food stamps and close down Medicaid in 1 year. So
well, I do think you need to do that. I think you need to reform the welfare state, but everybody's got to, talk a lot of talk these days about shared sacrifice. Well, that means if you want to have any credibility in this debate, you're going to have to cut every program in every department, including the Pentagon. And Republicans lose a lot of credibility when they say we're just going to cut our favorite Democratic program.
Yeah. One of the suggestions I've made to try to solve this problem, they've gotten together. There's been too much bipartisanship over the years. They both agree to spend for their different programs, Republicans for one thing and the Democrats for another. If they would ever come to their senses and say, we really do have to cut spending, why shouldn't the Democrats get to cut the Republicans' programs and the Republicans get to pick the Democrats' program and come together? So if I want $1 trillion cut, they ought to split it up and find out and cut each other's. But they're not to that point yet. In Washington, I haven't met anybody that really thinks this problem is serious enough to actually cut anything. It's all this game they play about, well, if we just reduce the amount of growth in government, this will solve the problem. I don't believe that. I think the crisis is much worse than that.
Indeed. I don't think people understand we're on the road to Athens here when national debt is over 100% of GDP or approaching that. And as you pointed out, $1.4 trillion deficits. There will simply come a point where interest on the debt, which is getting close, as I understand it, to 17-18% of the budget, will elicit another downgrade. And like inflation, you will start to get a spiraling effect.
Yeah, and what happens if the interest rates bump, when interest rates bump up 1, 2, or 3 or 4%,
right.
I mean, it will be just astounding what that's going to do to us. In order to get out of the mess we had in the 70s, the interest rates actually, some of the prime rate went up to 21%,
right.
And that would just cause a worldwide collapse. But I think that's what's coming, because you can't print money forever.
Well, that's what has to come.
People will always take it.
Right. I mean, in a sane world, nobody would lend the United States money for under 10%. I mean, the artificially low interest rates, as you've pointed out, is what's gotten us into the mess, whether it was the dot-com bubble or the real estate bubble or now a commodity bubble or a farmland bubble in Iowa. It is too much money chasing an asset. But I do have to ask you an Austrian question here, since you are our premier Austrian economist on the Republican slate, and that is, all right, if the classic boom and bust cycle of easy money and the Federal Reserve out of control elicited all of these bubbles and then they crashed when balance sheets went south and you had to retrench, which you always do, why aren't we in another artificial boom? At some point, do the markets get wise and say, okay, we understand the money's still fiat money, they're printing it like crazy, but we're not falling for this capital goods explosion this time?
Well, over the real bubble, and I look at modern history starting in 1971 when there was no linkage to gold, no restraint, and there were recessions. And you're right, they would. The market says you have to have a recession. They'd raise the interest rates. There would be a modest correction. They would spend more money, and they'd come out of the recession. But finally, when the debt burden gets so big and the malinvestment is so out of control, you just can't get out of it by just printing more money.
Yeah,
you can't fool the market forever.
Right.
So therefore, the liquidation of debt and getting rid of the malinvestment is crucial, and they won't permit it. And this is why we've been doing this for 4 years. But yes, in the earlier stages of the destruction of a currency, you can fool the people, but you're not fooling them as well, and you can't fool the markets forever.
Yeah, that's right.
But we do have a bubble going right now. The bubble is with the dollar and the bonds. The bonds cost so much, and the interest rates are so low. Investors don't buy that. I don't know of anybody who would buy a 20 or 30-year government bond so that they can send their kids to college or save for retirement. Those are all bought by banks and foreign central banks. We probably give them the credit, and they'd buy it. It's all manipulation of a system that no longer is sustainable. When you're wealthy, you can do it, but we're not wealthy. Everything is debt, and we owe foreigners the money. Even in the Depression, we were a creditor nation. We weren't a debtor nation. So it's quite different now. I think we're witnessing the end stages of a financial system that started 40 years ago, and it's going to be a worldwide calamity when people realize what's happening.
Okay, hold that thought. I'll just keep you for about 3 or 4 more minutes, and when we come back, we can talk about your appearances in Nevada, Minnesota, across the country, and we'll talk quickly about Florida, and I know you got to go, so just about 5 more minutes with Dr. Ron Paul here on The Jason Lewis Show. What would you say if I described a president who believed the U.S. should not go to war unless our survival was at stake, who slashed defense spending, refused to use nuclear weapons, balanced the budget, and indeed, when Britain, France, and Israel seized the Suez Canal in the mid-1950s, forced them to withdraw in an even-handed way in the Middle East? I think our guest, Dr. Ron Paul, knows of whom I'm speaking. That would be Dwight Eisenhower. Is that the sort of republicanism you aspire to?
Certainly, the things that you mentioned. I mean, there were some infractions, but he certainly had a better feel for it. He had been involved in World War II, obviously, so I think he had a better feel for trying to avoid these crises. And I remember 1956 very well because I was in college and I said I didn't pay much attention to politics except for the Suez crisis. And I thought for sure I would be drafted, but Eisenhower resolved that rather quickly, and I sighed some relief. And I said, well, I don't have to get drafted now. And it took about 5 more years, and then I was drafted.
The new frontier got you.
Yeah, during the 60s I was drafted.
Well, there's this debate between Romney and Gingrich over the establishment versus the insurgent or the grassroots. When it comes to foreign policy, there's a bipartisan establishment.
Absolutely, and although we hear a little bit of talk from Gingrich on the Federal Reserve, I think he's very, very much establishment. I didn't get much help, on some of these issues when I was in the Congress and he was the Speaker, but it just astounds me to think that Newt Gingrich is the anti-establishment Tea Party candidate. That gets a little bit carried away.
You were very effective in Iowa going after Gingrich. Romney certainly has been going after Gingrich. much very effectively, bringing down his numbers. Why hasn't the Paul campaign in on Mitt Romney, or are you waiting for a two-man race?
Well, we have, early on, and we did, the flip-flop ads, and we went after him on Medicare, but it was just strategically, we thought it was better that we had to, we were surprised that Gingrich ever got as far as he did, but that's what we were trying to prevent, but it didn't quite do it.
So we can expect some anti-Romney ads?
Well, yeah, it's very possible, but I'm not saying can or anything like that.
You will be, let us see, Minnesota has their caucuses along with Colorado on February 7th. I think Nevada's right around the corner. So are you focusing on some of these caucus states, non-binding though they may be, because they're easier to organize and to amass delegates as opposed to the big primary states tomorrow, Florida?
Absolutely. To have competed adequately in Florida, a big state like that, you have to have tens of millions of dollars, and we don't have that kind of money. We have pretty good donors, and we have adequate money. So strategically, we've decided to go after the caucus states, and that's why we spend some time up in Maine, and we will be spending time in Nevada and Colorado and in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So, and I think we have a much better chance of getting the delegates that we need to be true competitors.
Right through Tampa.
That's the goal.
And we're not going to get into ifs, but you will be here in Minnesota. Where else are you going to go in the next? Here in Minnesota this week, I believe, right?
Right. And then at the end of this week, and then again next week, I make two quick trips up there, and I think we have something scheduled for the state of Washington. I think it's another place where we have some pretty good numbers. So
you're not worried about coming in at 9 or 10% in Florida being hurt or being deleterious over the long term.
I really don't think so, because I think what we're doing, because we don't even know exactly who's going to get those votes out of Iowa, and we think we have a pretty good chance of getting a nice lump of those. So
right.
Even though they have written that off and said that Santorum won it, he really didn't. Like, he got all 25 votes. That's not the case. So we're picking up votes along the way.
Yeah, and of course Florida's delegate count will be cut in half anyway.
Yeah, they dropped half because they had the early primary, but
right.
It is true that if Romney wins it, he gets I think there's 25 or 50 that he'll end up getting.
Who are you thinking about for vice president?
I haven't thought too much about that.
Is it a choice between Barry Manilow, Snoop Dogg, and Jesse Ventura? Can we rule those three out?
Well, I haven't ruled anybody out. I mean, I don't want to offend anybody,
Well, I may need a job here in a couple of years.
That's right. You better put in your application.
All right, Congressman Ron Paul, thanks so much for stopping by.
Right.
We do appreciate your time, and good luck on the campaign trail.
Thanks a lot.
You bet. Congressman Ron Paul telling you why he truly is the grassroots insurgent candidate, and he's got some credible points there when you take a look at all of the things that the others agree on, especially when it comes to foreign policy.